Thank you for coming back, and welcome again to our virtual audience. I wanted to let you all know that we had over 400 people join us online yesterday, and it's unique IPs. So that's a big response for us. I think that's one of the largest virtual audiences we've had. So again, a testament to the timeliness of this topic and the interest in it. We're gonna come back to new opportunities for libraries and librarians, and I'll turn it over to Marjorie Hassan to kick things off. Thank you.
Thanks, Marilee. Before we get started, I'll say thank you to those who contributed to our poll this morning. Hopefully this helped to get you back in the frame of mind to think about MOOCs, challenges, and opportunities. The poll will still be active. I'm going to take it down now, but for those of you who would still like to post, Marilee put the URL up on Twitter. So if you don't have it now, you can get back to it. We're going to come back to some of the comments that people posted on the poll during the question period later on in the hour. So I'll welcome you to what I believe we can safely call the why, where, what, and how session. Why do we care about MOOCs? Where are we in the conversation at our individual campuses? What should we be doing to support MOOCs, if anything? And how do we approach meeting the needs of what is arguably a massive opportunity? I'm joined here today by three individuals who are going to address some of those questions. Lynn O'Brien, directly to my right, Director of Academic Technology and Instructional Services at Duke. Sarah Bordak, Head of Instructional Design at Brown. And at the end, Jennifer Dorner, who's Head of Instruction and User Services at Berkeley. When the four of us met with Marilee initially, which was virtual, to discuss today's panel, it was clear that, as is the case at many of our institutions, we were all involved in some way supporting campus MOOC initiatives. But the conversation focused as much on questions as answers. At Penn, for example, along with several of my colleagues, I've been part of the conversation on campus around online learning, MOOCs, and Coursera in particular. Penn Library staff have been directly involved in managing copyright clearance for course content and have been participating in the various university-wide teams that were formed to support the Coursera initiative on campus, including assessment, production, and course design. On the other hand, we've only just begun to consider how to approach research and other academic support for students enrolled in MOOCs. So today we're going to pick up the thread that was started at the end of the day yesterday and address the questions: why do we want to be in the midst of MOOCs? Where in these courses is there a place for us? What does it mean to be embedded in a MOOC? And how do we translate our more traditional roles as liaisons and content providers to the massive aspect of online courses? My colleagues in this slide spent a great deal of time trying to think about what embeddedness means, and this is what they came up with. So each of our panelists are going to spend about 10 minutes talking about the current landscape on our campus, and specifically the library's role supporting the MOOC effort. We'll then have a discussion focusing on a few key questions, including some of the comments that were posted to the poll, and at the end there'll be time to take questions from the audience here. So we're going to begin with Lynn, who's going to first frame the conversation and then talk about her work at Duke.
Good morning. It's nice to be here and see all of you. I'm Lynn O'Brien from Duke University. I'm Director of Academic Technology and Instructional Services in the Duke University Libraries. And as I'll be noting a little bit later on, our support for a whole range of instructional technology initiatives has been part of the Center for Instructional Technology's mission, and the CIT, the Center for Instructional Technology, is part of the library. So we've been embedded for many years. I thought I would start by, let me swing this around a little bit this way, by talking a little bit about why I think we should care about MOOCs. This was a question we discussed in our planning a little bit. Is there really a role for libraries? Should libraries be involved? And I think that it's critical that libraries be involved, because The MOOCs, while they do continue a tradition that many of our schools have had of some form of online education, yes, online education is not new, international education is not new, but I do think there is something different about this moment in time and these particular classes that will be disruptive in ways that earlier online initiatives were not. Disruptive not only to teaching, but to the library, to central IT organizations, and many other aspects of university life. One of the things that's different compared to earlier online initiatives is that a fair amount of the MOOC activity has been externally driven, in the sense that they started with faculty members at Stanford, but all of them, to some extent, are being supported by either startup companies or by new forms of organizational structures in our universities. The rapid uptake has surprised everybody, the hundreds of thousands of people who have flocked to these courses. And the bullet right after that, I think, helps to explain why the rapid uptake seems to have caught us by surprise. The initial reaction is, these courses don't seem to fit the model of anything we know about how to do online education well. They're not highly personal, and they're not highly interactive one-on-one with the faculty member. So all these best practices for online education don't seem to be applied in the courses, and yet hundreds of thousands of people are taking the courses, and many of them are actually very happy with them. So how do we make sense of that? Things are changing quickly, and that includes not only the technology platform, but the course structures, the way in which faculty are involved, the mix between different kinds of groups on campus, and so some of the processes that we have don't really fit anymore. And it's all happening within an environment where there is a lot of public questioning and discussion around the value of higher education, the cost of higher education. So it creates kind of a perfect storm for a new way of thinking about things. At Duke, we will have completed 11 MOOC courses by the end of June, by the end of our academic year. And they are from all different subject areas and schools. I'll show you the list in just a minute. We have over 600,000 registrations, and I made sure I put in the parentheses thing about non-unique, because many people are taking more than one, and we don't have an easy way to separate all of that out. We've had very positive feedback about some things. We've had criticism about others, and we're changing very quickly in response to that feedback. So this is the list of the courses, and the main thing I would point out here is that sometimes you'll hear people say, well, they're good for computer science and for technical subjects, but that's about it. Not really. Our single biggest course, and in fact the biggest course at Coursera to date, is a philosophy course that Duke is offering, the one called Think Again, How to Reason and Argue. There were 180,000 registrations for that course, by far more than any of our other subject areas. And we have some courses that are close to an introductory level, some that are a more advanced level. One of the things that has been interesting is that given the option to start their courses whenever they want and to make the courses any length that they want, none of our faculty pretty much chose to align with our traditional semester either, in terms of when they started or how long they were. So that, in turn, has led a lot of conversations on campus about, well, wait a minute, tell me again, why are our courses 14 weeks long when none of us thought that was really the ideal length for a course? And our astronomy course, for example, the faculty member decided to start the course on the day of a really interesting astronomical event in the night sky, and one of his initial activities was to have students from all around the world go out and take a picture and share it. And so that class got off to a very interesting start that wouldn't have happened if he had to start the course in September. You've already heard that students are from all around the world. These are where most of the Duke Coursera students are from in terms of regions. And I put that up as a reminder that there are many challenges excuse me, for libraries inherent in this kind of population. You'll notice, for example, that the percent from Africa looks low, and that's partly because the infrastructure for internet access in Africa is low. That creates additional issues around the kinds of materials that are used in classes, because even if we negotiate with publishers to make copies of their electronic versions of their books available for free, there are many people who can't access things conveniently in that way in those countries. They need to be able to download it. Excuse me. And we've had people who have written and said, I live in an African country, I don't have reliable internet access, I can't be online all the time to read the book. I need to be able to download it. Oh, and by the way, your e-reader renders the textbook in Flash so that I can't copy it, but it also means that I can't read it on my iPhone, and it's basically not accessible to me. So lots of interesting questions come out of that international audience. The library. As I said, the Center for Instructional Technology is part of the library. We have been for 14 years. The academic technology consultants in the CIT are the primary group working with the faculty on designing their courses and helping them get those materials into the platform, working with them while they're teaching the courses. Our librarians have offered to help in a variety of ways, ranging from helping people find open access materials, offering to develop certain kinds of guides for the courses. You heard from Kevin Smith yesterday. He's our scholarly communication director, and we have an intern working with him around negotiating for materials in the courses. The library has an assessment specialist who divides her time between the Center for Instructional Technology and other types of library assessment, and she's been working officially half-time on assessment around MOOCs. My guess is she's doing that 100% time and doing her library job 100% time too. And we also work closely with our Office of Information Technology, which is our central IT group. They're handling a lot of the video production, and the Provost's office is funding this and is the primary academic leader for this on campus. We've talked a lot about challenges, but I wanted to make sure that we highlight the opportunities. I picked these 3 quotes from students for a reason. I'll tell you what the reasons are for each one. The first one, dearest Professor Barr, thank you for the wonderful stage you set for us. Has so much texture and warmth, it's hard to imagine it took place in a virtual world. It changed my life. I thought that was important because there is at least some sense for people who haven't been deeply involved with the MOOCs that I keep hearing things like, well, they're kind of like correspondence courses or like the old-time public TV broadcasting. But the experience of people in the courses is not necessarily that. And many of them do find it a deeply personal experience, depending on what they put into it. The second one, this was for a genetics and evolution course, demonstrated to us that Duke is home of the most excellent academics, the most caring and kind. The biology department will forever be the best in the world in my mind. There are opportunities, we hope, for connecting with prospective students, prospective faculty. The outreach has been a good thing for Duke. And then the last one from one of the astronomy courses, where the person talks about going out with his children and looking up at the night sky, and they've been taking the course together. We've seen quite a few cases where families are doing the courses, and it may very well be that those parents will steer some of their students to apply to Duke who might not have considered that in the past. We also have a lot of high school and college teachers in our courses who have said they are getting all kinds of creative ideas for teaching as well as content updates. So we hope that they will in turn be helping with college education elsewhere and with K-12 education. Faculty have said it's a huge amount of work, but it's also been a wonderful opportunity for them. And I guess one of the best signs of success is that almost all of them, in fact, as of right now, all of them have said they will be teaching their courses again. the fourth bullet down is one that I wanted to highlight, and that is that these are all experienced faculty. Many of them are teaching award winners. They've taught these courses many, many times, and yet all of them found that the process of creating the courses for this environment made them rethink how they teach, how they know what's effective. And as one of them said, when you have 20,000 people looking at every single thing you say and do and publicly pointing out any mistakes you make, he said, I just wondered these last 20 years, my students at Duke don't really raise their hand and say, you made a mistake in line 3, but these people taking it for free do. And so all of them feel that their teaching has become better in ways because of that. So I'm going to stop. I'll a couple of quick ideas ahead, and then I'll stop, and we can talk more during the question and answer if you want. We're also experimenting with 4-credit courses taught in a different format with a company called 2U. This will be the first time we offer undergraduate courses for credit. And unlike the MOOCs, they have small sections of students and they have live video chats with instructors as part of the course. But I mention that because we're working in a consortium of 10 schools, and many of the same issues that come up with MOOCs also will come up in this environment, even though it's a 4-credit environment. How do you work with licensed materials across multiple schools? How do you think about research services and reference services to people when they're at a variety of different institutions and so on? We'll be doing more MOOCs next year. We're working on promoting open access. And I think one of the lessons we're learning is that instead of thinking about courses as having these distinct components of there's the lecture, there's the textbook, there's the quizzes, there's the slides, all of this is becoming a mix that's so integrated that it's very difficult to see how each of those individual parts can be separated from the others. And that's our website where you can learn lots more about what we're doing. And I'm going to stop right there. Thank you.
Good morning. Sarah Bordak from Brown University Library. Before I jump into what we're doing with Coursera MOOCs, I just want to lay out the scenario of what we're dealing with at Brown. That one single circle over there, the pre-college online classes, as of the end of last summer, that was the only real online instruction that was happening at Brown. We had a new president come in last summer, and as part of that, her coming in, there's a strategic planning process going on that will probably be finished sometime middle of this coming summer. And so these other blobs are part of what we're grappling with. We have a Canvas network MOOC for pre-college students that will be launching in the next couple of weeks. We have 3 courses for Coursera that will be launching in June. We have a flipped classroom pilot that will be run this fall, a microeconomics class. We have a new online credit-bearing class, the first one at Brown, that will be launched this summer. And we have a blended executive master's in healthcare leadership program that will also be launching at the end of the summer. So there's a lot of kind of learning going on campus. And as part of that, that's happening in the continuing education department. It's happening, they're the ones who are running the pre-college programs and the executive master's program. It's also happening through the Center of Teaching and Learning. And the library is a part of these conversations in a number of different ways. So the 3 Coursera classes that we are developing, they launch early June, are an archaeology class. And the professor, Sue Alcock, who's teaching that class, really wants to promote an interest in archaeology. So there's very little prerequisites for this class. There's very little outside reading. It's about the experience of learning about archaeology. And as part of her teaching, she's bringing in her peers and colleagues to talk about what they do to really introduce the different ways that archaeology can be done. Phil Klein is teaching a linear algebra class, and he really wants to impart his passion for teaching linear algebra, and his energy and his enthusiasm comes through in his lectures. It's one of the programming-based classes. So we have so far outlined a social sciences and a computer science class. And then we have a humanities class, which has been, I think, the thing that the library's been most involved with from a content perspective, and that is a class that's been taught at Brown for 20 years, and the professor is in the process of transforming it for this, for the Coursera platform. So they all bring different reasons for teaching the class. They bring different needs and interests. And I mention that because I think it's really important for us to think about what the pedagogical needs are before we think about the library needs to be a part of it. So what is it that they're trying to do, the professor's trying to do with their classes, and then what is the natural way that the library can support those needs? And in some cases, it may be very little. So the teams that have formed, with those little blobs I put up about all the activity happening on campus, there is a lot of overlap, but the Coursera project has had the biggest overlap across the campus, I think, in terms of a formal structure of a multidisciplinary team. As I mentioned, the Center for Teaching and Learning is involved, the Continuing Education Office, Media Production Services, which, along with Academic Technology at Brown, is in the IT and CIS unit, and then the University Library. So there are 4 of us that meet every week about the MOOC projects, and there's a lot of email correspondence, and we are constantly keeping each other in touch with questions that come up, movement in certain areas, things that come up from Coursera that we're responding to, and other way around. What are we asking Coursera for? The multidisciplinary collaboration has really helped us be able to respond quickly to the issues that have come up. We've been able to engage the faculty with quick responses to their questions on a number of different levels in terms of their kind of pedagogical intentions, best practices, the copyright and fair use questions. And it's also helped us collectively administer from an academic as well as an administrative perspective. And that includes working with the TAs, because these professors are also teaching their regular classes, and there's a lot of additional support that the TAs will need in terms of their work. Now, again, we haven't launched any of these classes, so we're in the pre-production mode, and we're learning from our colleagues who have gone before us about how much the TA obligations are and what it will look like when we actually launch, but we're trying to prepare for that as well. So when the role that I've been playing on this team is similar to the role that I've played on campus anyway, which is to be a connector between different resources in the library. And I have relied heavily on all the expertise of my colleagues in the library to go back to them with questions about copyright and fair use. The head of the campus copyright committee is in the library, and I'm sitting in his office frequently with all of these different scenarios. Can we use this? What should we do here? This is what my gut says. What's our recommendation? Also, with regards to public domain images, our art history librarian has already pulled together a lot of these resources. And so what she has done is she's already got this up on a LibGuide that she promotes to her constituents. And that has turned out to be a great resource for us to then share with the folks working on the Coursera projects. We also have a digital production services group. We've been digitizing objects from our special collections for years. And with the archaeology class, there were objects that needed to be scanned. And so we've done some 3D scans to be included in the class, bringing objects from the collection online. And there's also an intellectual property committee that's currently meeting on campus, and so those conversations are also happening kind of on a different group of people, but we're tapping into that group as well. I guess one of the things that, in terms of the, mentioning all of the work that I'm tapping that's already being done, is to think about we're not really doing a whole lot of new work. There is a lot of new time being consumed in these projects, but we're in many ways just leveraging a lot of the work, and we're well prepared to do to work in this area. one thing that surprised me was, one example was one of the professors wanted to have students in a face-to-face class shoot video of her students out. They wanted to go out into the streets of Providence and interview people, and then post those videos in the Coursera class. So she was going to take a face-to-face class content and use it in the Coursera class. And suddenly, as the liaison between the legal counsel for the university, I was talking about FERPA issues. That's something, I mean, I'm familiar with FERPA, but that's not something that the library is usually working as closely with legal counsel on. The expertise that I guess that we had in the library that may or may not be kind of typical is that I have a background in media production and educational technology, although the academic technology group is separate. And so I have kind of brought in the less traditional library roles into the conversation and relied, as I mentioned, heavily on my colleagues' expertise and their help as I've tried to navigate this. We haven't had a whole lot of success in matching the librarian for the typical librarian for the domain, so the computer science librarian or the comparative literature librarian, to embed them in the course. But again, I go back to the kind of what are the pedagogical needs for the class. In the case of the archaeology class, we have had that relationship, but it existed already very strongly. Our archaeology librarian happens to also be a faculty member in the archaeology department, and he will be participating in the development of the class, but more as an archaeologist who can also impart some of the other skills. So that's my piece. I'm going to hand over to... Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Dorner. I'm at UC Berkeley, and I'm going to talk first, like Sarah, a little bit about the status of online education at Berkeley and give you an idea of where the Berkeley X is fitting in. While there is some loose coordination of online instruction on campus, Berkeley has allowed departments, colleges, and educational programs to experiment with different technologies and modes of delivery and to operate largely independently. It's very typical of Berkeley. Centralizing and standardizing the programs would definitely be more efficient and less wasteful, but it's considered that it would also stifle innovation. So online educational offerings are, however, supposed to be guided by principles articulated by the campus's steering committee for online education, and those emphasize a commitment to access and excellence, a focus on improving teaching quality, the opportunity to generate revenue and other types of return on investment, and the opportunity to learn through experimentation. And to support these efforts, the campus recently established the Berkeley Resource Center for Online Education. So as at many other institutions, UC Berkeley has a wide assortment of online educational offerings. The UC Berkeley Extension offers 165 online courses, and in 2010 served approximately 6,000 students, most of whom were not matriculated. The UC Online Education pilot was launched in 2011 and funded faculty from the 10 University of California campuses to offer large gateway lower division courses for online delivery, the first of which was offered in spring 2012. The intent for that program is to expand access to undergraduate courses and allowing students to fulfill a portion of their lower division coursework online, and that's very, very new venture for the University of California. Summer session has a growing number of online classes to enrolled students in summer 2012, offering 12 in a range of disciplines. And our professional schools are developing online educational programs. The first one was the School of Public Health. It's an on-campus / online professional degree. The on-campus online professional Masters of Public Health, or OOMPH as it's called, and electrical engineering and computer science, the Haas School of Business and the School of Information are also offering programs or developing programs. So in July 2012, Berkeley joined edX, the not-for-profit MOOC system founded by Harvard and MIT, And joining edX allows Berkeley to contribute to the initiative of distributing higher education more broadly, while at the same time, and hopefully informing faculty and instructional designers about improving online education and contributing to our understanding of how students learn and how technology can transform learning. So the courses that have been offered so far, as you can see, have been mainly in electrical engineering and computer science and in statistics. And this has, I think that this is kind of typical of some of the other schools too, have started out in these areas more in the sciences and math rather than in the humanities or social sciences. The lack of coordination and lack of centralization of these efforts really do pose challenges for the library. Librarians provide instructional support to summer sessions and the public health program because the students participating are enrolled at UC Berkeley. Technically, we have not been involved in the UC extension courses and the UC online education pilot moved forward without any consultation with the library. So Berkeley X courses, as you can see, offered in fall and spring, they haven't really involved library participation either, but that's not really a surprise since a review of their course materials didn't really reveal any library-related learning objectives or a need for research skills to access material beyond what was offered in the course. Well, with the onset of Berkeley X and the growing desire on campus to be involved in online education in a variety of ways, it behooved the library to think about where it played a role in all of these different programs. So we did draft the UC Berkeley Library Policies and Practices for Online Education Programs, and that outlines levels of support that we can offer to different types of online educational programs. But detailed policies and practices for public good courses, such as edX, remain undefined as we work through issues surrounding courses with large enrollments and highly diverse demographics. Elizabeth Dupuy, who's here, our AUL for Educational Initiatives and User Services, put together a small team of librarians and other campus partners to consider the library's role in Berkeley X and also in the edX partnership. And a meeting with the academic director of the Berkeley Resource Center for Online Education, who is also a MOOC instructor, did result in a better understanding of the edX platform and the challenges faced by faculty who are designing courses. One outcome of that meeting was an addition to the center's website of guidelines for using copyrighted material in online courses that was created by our e-learning librarian, Cody Hennessy. When it was announced that UC Berkeley had joined edX, the university librarians at Harvard and MIT reached out to the library administration at UC Berkeley and then to administrators at the University of Texas and Wellesley College and Georgetown University, who were at the time all the partners in the edX program. And they began a conversation about how libraries should, might, could be involved in the provision of MOOCs offered on their campuses, and if so, whether there were opportunities here for librarians to work collaboratively. Areas of interest, of course, were intellectual property, fair use, Creative Commons licensing, support for instructors and courses, how to identify and promote free and open source content, and how to support students' acquisition of research and information literacy skills. So two key areas, content accessibility and research skills, were identified as likely areas of collaboration. In December 2012, working groups were formed from the member campuses. So the content accessibility working group includes representatives from Georgetown, Wellesley, Harvard, MIT, and UC Berkeley, and their charge is to recommend best practices regarding content use and accessibility. At this point, I'm not involved in their work, so I don't know what progress they've made. The research skills working group includes librarians from UC Berkeley, MIT, Harvard, UT Austin, and Georgetown. And they collectively bring their expertise and knowledge of continuing education, curriculum design, information literacy instruction, and online learning to bear on the question of how to best invest the library's limited resources to provide meaningful instruction to learners in MOOCs. The working group is examining existing and proposed edX courses at their home institutions to determine whether library-related learning objectives are already incorporated into campus versions of MOOCs, and to recommend how those might evolve to work within the MOOC environment. As the edX platform is unknown to most of us and evolving in its development, we are also learning more about it and its capabilities for integrating learning objects in a variety of formats. Once we've completed our environmental scan and we have a better understanding of the platform, we will be better positioned to make recommendations about approaches to content development, whether that involves developing and sharing content among the participating institutions and possibly with other institutions using different MOOC platforms, or developing best practices for identifying and selecting existing instructional materials for our faculty, because there is a lot of content out there that's already been created. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. Regardless of the outcomes, I think that this group of edX librarians has contributed to our understanding of teaching and learning in the online environment and the landscapes of online learning at our various respective campuses. We are being opportunistic in leveraging the relationships we have with other academic support units on campus and also with the faculty that we regularly work with. We see this as an opportunity to educate faculty about fair use, copyright issues, open access, and accessibility for users with disabilities. All of the librarians in our working group, I believe, are cautiously optimistic about contributing to courses being offered in edX, but are also aware of that contribution will really greatly depend on the resources available at their own institutions. And that definitely does provide us with an incentive for identifying resources or ways that we can share practices that are efficient and scalable. One of the things that we've talked about in the last 2 days is this idea of whether or not we're supporting the faculty or whether or not we're supporting the students when we're talking about embedding a librarian in a MOOC. And I think that that's something that we do have to kind of continue the conversation about, because I see that the work that we do in terms of supporting a faculty, not very different from what I do already with a course. So, but the idea of supporting students on that scale is very different from what I do now. So I'm hoping that that's one of the things that we can talk about is in the next part when we're answering the questions is where do we see us falling in embedding in a class in terms of how we work with the faculty and how we work with the students. So thank you.
For those comments. I'd like to start, we'll come back to your question about embedding, but I'd like to start with partnerships, because that's a theme that each of you raised and was also raised by some of the folks who posted to the poll. So can you talk a little bit about how libraries can not only participate in collaborative efforts on campuses, but to lead these efforts? Where is the role, the leadership role there for us?
You want to go?
No.
Well, I think that the partnerships are something that we do a lot of already, and so it's the partnership piece, at least at Brown, has come about because we already had those relationships. We're working closely with the academic technology folks, with the Center for Teaching and Learning. We were already working with continuing ed on supporting their pre-college classes. So the partnerships seem to be very natural. And in terms of the leadership, the campus looks to the library for things like copyright and fair use. And so those were natural leadership roles to take. There are other roles that aren't really filled on this level, like I mentioned the FERPA surprise, and having a liaison with legal counsel and building yet another partnership or relationship with another unit on campus, so that when these questions came up in the capacity of, in this case, Coursera, there was one person on the team who could handle those questions. So I think that our leadership role is perhaps one that is, it's part of a team. It's not leading the whole charge necessarily, but as part of a collaborative team, just having clear responsibilities, because at least in our case, the amount that we have each learned about what our units do and how we can help each other extends far beyond any MOOC project, and will filter into all other projects that we collaborate on as we move forward.
At Duke, the Center for Instructional Technology is the lead organization in supporting the MOOCs in close partnership with other groups, and the CIT is part of the library. But the library is also well connected with other groups in both its physical capabilities as well as its interactions. For example, we have a multimedia production studio in the library. We had that before the MOOCs started. That group, that production studio is managed by our Office of Information Technology, our central IT group, but it is directly across the hall from the Center for Instructional Technology. So it's been easy for a while to refer faculty back and forth between the pedagogical consulting and the production consulting of those two organizations. They're physically both located in the building together. And we had already done projects, campus-wide projects, where the CIT, the Office of Information Technology, Librarians, Assessment Office, and different groups had worked together. So we were pretty well prepared for doing that this time too.
I think that the library at UC Berkeley is valued by its other academic support unit partners, and I think that we have probably a better understanding of who should all be in the conversation than maybe some of the other groups on campus that are involved with developing courses in edX. I'm not entirely sure whether or not we feel it's our place to step forward as the leader in this area. I mean, we want to be a voice at the table, and I think, again, that we have a good perspective on how to maybe get all those voices together. But I don't know that that's really our role at this point.
When we talk about embedding, or we talk about licensing, which are more traditional roles for libraries, and particularly if we think about the licensing of resources, open access resources versus the electronic resources that we're paying for, and the question around how we're going to support students in these courses when they don't have access to the resources. Where's the library's role there in that conversation? Are we being cut out? Are we going to be cut out as the provider because these courses are being developed in ways that have to work around the resource licensing piece?
Well, I don't think that we are going to be cut out of the conversation entirely, because I think that if people want to use the licensed resources, they're going to have to come to us to talk about it. So we're going to be able to have the opportunity in those conversations to say, there are other options out there for you. And we talked about this a little bit yesterday when we were saying that this is a real opportunity to educate faculty about the need for owning the rights to their content and making it accessible to other people. And I think that this is really a good place for us to educate them about open source and push them in that direction. So I don't think that we're going to be left out of the conversation in that sense.
I think it might have been said yesterday that that faculty are very comfortable with the rules around using resources in their face-to-face classrooms, and then the use of whatever learning management system to provide readings and other things. And we've found that the faculty are coming to us. The three faculty for this class are very aware of what the risks are with using licensed resources, and so it's a need. We've done it over the many years. They've understood how fair use applies to them in the classroom to a certain extent. They're very comfortable with that, but the exposure of doing something in a MOOC has really the library's been there and has brought them to us to do that. In one of the classes, the humanities class, we had a little bit of a different scenario because it wasn't online resources. The professor wants to teach books from the mid-1700s to present day. And so how do you do that if you can't guarantee, how do you guarantee access to all of the materials? We can't. So anything that is in copyright, we just created a second module for the course. And so the library then had some influence in terms of making a recommendation on how the course should be structured. So anything that was in the public domain is taught as the first module, and all students who enroll are expected to finish that module. And anybody who wants to continue on to do the second module, which means they have to find the resources, can continue on and do that class. And so it wasn't our responsibility to put the materials in the hands of all the students, but we had a voice in recommending how the class gets structured to make sure that students had access to what they needed.
I'll offer perhaps a little bit more contrarian perspective. I think there may be some very disruptive changes for libraries as a broker between publishers and students in terms of providing materials to them. There are opportunities to negotiate, and as Kevin pointed out yesterday, we shouldn't assume that just because something's copyrighted means that we can't provide it. We've had some good success with some publishers about being able to take a copyrighted resource and make it available to students. And we certainly agree that open access is a critical thing. And in fact, it may be that some of our digital collections that we provide will see greater use and receive broader recognition. So that would be a wonderful thing. However, when I look at what's happening with the MOOCs in general, as well as some other kinds of things that are happening, Khan Academy, Peer-to-Peer Academy, Code Academy, some of these other things, there are two things happening. One is there's a movement away from the concept even of a course, and the idea that education might very well end up being delivered as smaller units, more self-contained, more self-paced, in which case the kind of negotiation and discussion around building a course might become less relevant. And then a second thing that I see happening is that there's a lot more, to the extent that publishers are beginning to say, oh, wait a minute, we don't want to be left out of this MOOC thing completely. I think there is a strong pressure to do a direct publisher to consumer model where there will be publishers trying to find ways to deliver materials directly to students outside of the regular library licensing arrangements that we typically work on. And that's because a lot of our licensing agreements are based on the physical concept of the university being a place with people who belong there and people who don't belong there, and that's how you decide who can have access and who can't. In this new environment, the physicality drops away, and so that model for thinking about things doesn't fit very well.
So is there a role for us there in helping to negotiate those licenses, to be at the front with the publishers, or are we going to be reactive and see what happens down the road?
I can't say whether we're going to be reactive or not, but the things that I would advocate, and I know that these are very difficult to do, libraries have as their core their mission to make information available to people, and yet we have been pressured more and more by publishers through the years to have very restrictive types of licensing arrangements. So one role for libraries might be as more advocates of different kinds of licensing models. I don't know how successful they'll be, but we could really think about advocacy as a bigger part of our role in all of that. And then the other part could be accelerating something we already do, which is we do promote open access, but trying to really play pivotal roles both as perhaps publishers of open access materials, really stepping up our efforts around institutional repositories, and much more assertive work with faculty, trying to convince them to deposit their scholarly output into our repositories I think would be a way that libraries could have a very positive influence.
I'd also say that it's an opportunity for marketing of our own collections, our digital assets of
Yes.
rare materials that don't have copyright issues, to sort of get those out to the faculty. One other question I want to get to, and then we'll open up to the audience, and this also is something that came up in some of the posts that to the poll, had to do with skills, and what is it that we should be preparing for? What are there skills that we need to develop, we need to hire differently if we're going to be supporting MOOCs?
You mean skills of the librarians involved in this?
Right.
I'm not sure that it's necessarily skills. It's just sort of a rethinking of the way that we do the work. I mean, personally, when I've been thinking about how I might provide assistance to faculty, some instructional support related to learning objectives that they might have in a course, and I've been thinking about what the audience would be for this content, I realized that I'm going to have to really think differently about the way I convey this information. I have to make it accessible to a much wider audience, a diverse audience, an audience, again, that isn't going to necessarily have access to all the resources that I would normally use as examples. So it requires me to go back and look at what I've developed before and rethink about how it's going to be appropriate for this kind of environment. So, it's sort of a re-education process, but I don't know that it requires additional skills. Mm-hmm. I mean, there might be some cases where we're being asked to participate more with the technology, and in that sense, yeah, we might need to learn more things. But I think in terms of the creation of knowledge and materials, that doesn't require additional skills than what we already have. We're leveraging what we already know.
Right. I would agree that we're leveraging what we already know and already do in many ways, but I think that we could do all of those things perhaps a little better, thinking about how we communicate our value, something libraries have struggled with, but in this new space, being able to articulate that, and not just from the top leaders in the organization, but that everybody who's interacting with faculty in particular should be able to have that conversation. As we think about subject librarians working closely with faculty in the development of these, or support of faculty and perhaps the students in these MOOCs, also having the expertise in instructional design, instead of having an instructional design librarian, but having and making sure that those people who have the relationships with the faculty, who are the go-to people for the content expertise and support of students and research in those disciplines, also understand the implications from a pedagogical standpoint of what the faculty member is trying to do. Because then we're going to be more equally at the table and more easily able to connect with the needs of the students in those classes. And I would just add to your point about technology is that just continuing to develop the agility that we need to be able to change. The conversations we're having today are around certain assumptions of technology. They'll be different in 6 months to a year, and so on. It's just going to keep changing, and we know this. But making sure that all of the staff share that. That's those skills that are, and they're able to change on the fly as the technology changes. These platforms, Coursera's platform is changing all the time. They're continuing to develop it, and we're, learning as we go.
I think it's very important that all librarians have experience taking at least one and preferably 2 or 3 MOOC courses as students in those courses to fully understand the model, because, and this is not true just for librarians, but I hear many comments about things that are simply not a good reflection of the way the courses are actually taught. And the only way to understand whether they are or are not interactive, or whether they are or are not accessible to people with different skill levels, is to be in them and to really try doing the work and experience what it's like to be a student. And then the other side of that is then to understand the technology platform well, because I think that you can't really be a full participant in course planning and a valued advisor to a faculty member if you don't understand what it takes to produce one of these courses. So I don't know that those are completely new skills, but those are skills that I think would be good to have.
It's a really good point about sitting in on classes, participating at that level.
I would do more than sit in.
Right.
I would try doing the actual
Right.
activities to see what it means.
Right. So any questions from the audience? We've answered everything.
We have something coming up.
Good morning. I have a question about, I think it's great that edX, the librarians involved in edX have gotten together and started talking about ways that the libraries can really be involved. I'm from Rutgers University, and we just joined Coursera, and I'm thinking that a lot of the problems that the edX group is solving would be really applicable to us as well. And I hate the idea of the Coursera librarians then getting together and replicating this model. And I'm wondering if there isn't maybe a larger platform that all librarians that are involved in MOOCs, regardless of which platform they're using, couldn't get together and talk about this, whether it's a SIG in one of our professional organizations or something like that. I was hoping maybe you could address that.
Actually, somebody raised that issue with me yesterday, and I think that's a great question. I mean, it's one of the things that we've talked about in our working group is that any ideas that we come up with, we don't want them just to be for our partners in edX. I mean, we would like to share this information. If we create resources, we would like to share them. If we come up with a strategy, we would like to share that. If we identify a library of available, easily accessible resources, we would like to share that. So again, it's just a matter of what's the means of providing that kind of information. So I don't know. I think actually one of our professional organizations could step up and provide us a forum, so where we can share that information. And I'd certainly be happy to talk to anybody about that.
Danuta Yutetsky, Drexel University. I'm struggling with a question here. I very much appreciate this discussion so far about the mechanics and the work of this as we continue to play the role of really serving our faculty in their education pursuit. But one of the things that to me this whole phenomena is hugely a sea change is the nature of the student. All of us have been working with students and supporting students that are coming as customers. They're paying to get an education. They're motivated by a certain attempt to get a credentialing or some sort of a form of certification that they've achieved a certain level. And a lot of what, particularly in the higher research-oriented universities, we are training them in the practice of becoming researchers, in engaging in knowledge as a communication, scholarly communication, all that. But here we're dealing with a much more democratic, broad-based group of students who we don't really know what their motivations, I think, are. I mean, this deals with this whole very important issue of the cost of education. And I think that element of free provision of something that we think of as what we provide for our pre-scholar kind of student orientation, motivation, to people who are just interested in learning, the lifelong learner and all that, and it's our colleagues in public libraries that have been dealing with this for years. I'm struggling with how does that affect what we're trying to do here? And it's a mix between thinking of a very different targeted student population and the whole question of the business model. How do we justify all of this expense, and how do we manage it in terms of some sort of return then, in terms of what we're doing globally? Because that's really what's happening here.
Go ahead.
It's a good question. I'm not sure what the answer really might be, but what we're looking at in terms of supporting the students, the possibilities of supporting the students in a way that is manageable, sustainable, useful, is to think about what our as I put on the slide, we have a lot of other wheels in motion related to online learning, and it's giving us an opportunity to think about how to support those students as well. So we are developing for all of these different types of students who will need, to varying degrees, similar content, 24/7 access, on-demand learning, not necessarily 24/7 by staffed librarians providing that support, but thinking about how we present our instructional content, paying attention to universal design principles, making sure that content is available, and clear for lots of different levels. I mean, our pre-college students need different things, or our teenager needs a different thing than perhaps an 80-year-old, but maybe not. If there are lots of things for us to consider, and so what we're doing is developing a lot of instructional content for the library website that will be delivered, can be linked from MOOCs or any of the other online efforts that we're doing, but not specifically designing content for the unknown MOOC population at this point. Again, we are a couple of months from launching our first classes. We want to see how those go. We're going to have some content to support those students. It doesn't seem right now that the classes we're doing are going to be research intensive, and therefore we don't need to provide the same kind of information literacy type support that we might do for a research class on campus. But we are trying to develop content that will be available online, that will be useful, and then faculty can link to it from their MOOCs.
I think I heard two things in the question and comments. One was about the what's the value for our campus in sort of giving everything away, and the second one had to do with how do we support students in these MOOC courses, starting from the point of doing things the way we do now. And I think there's some questions for both of those. One, in terms of the value for our organization where people are paying for foreign education. In all of the courses we've done, the faculty have changed something about their campus education to make that better. So our students are benefiting, our Duke students are benefiting from these courses in addition to the students in the MOOC classes. And the second thing about, well, how can we deliver content to all of these students around the world? I think it's hard to break free of it, but we don't need to assume that we have to be the starting point for all of that. And in fact, and this is another good reason for really immersing yourself in some of these courses, there are people with all sorts of levels of education and backgrounds in those courses. And many of them have content to share and offer, as well as being consumers of content. Many of the courses, there's a very active community of people saying, hey, I found a different example from the one the faculty member came up with. I uncovered this resource that's a really helpful explanation of something that was in week 2. And so tapping into that community and thinking about a community of learners who are working with each other and not simply being consumers is a change in mindset, but I think an important one.
I completely agree, and that was going to be my answer too. Marilee Prophet last week at a presentation that she gave talked about her experience in a MOOC and the fact that the students in the forums were sharing information, sharing additional resources, answering each other's questions. And I think that Christian touched on that yesterday too, when he was in his presentation about the type of peer review that goes on. And I think that that is a really valuable part of the learning experience for the students, being able to recognize that they bring value to the class as well, not just the instructor, and learning from each other is sometimes more comfortable for them than just learning from the instructor. And maybe they're more comfortable asking questions of each other than they are of the instructor. So I think that there's a real opportunity there for us to maybe provide them guidance on how they can help each other find resources, but we don't have to be the purveyor of all the information. And never mind. I'm not gonna go further. You're probably done on this. That's okay. We'll let Marilee answer a question. Sorry.
I think we have to end. Did you have a question?
I was just going to say it's been just a real pleasure to hear from this group, and it's time for a break before we bring up our final panel for the day. So let's go ahead and give them a hand, please.